The armed forces of the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya consisted of the Libyan Army, Libyan Air Force and the Libyan Navy and other services including the People's Militia. In November 2010, before the Libyan civil war in 2011, the total number of Libyan personnel was estimated at 76,000, though that war wore the military's numbers away. There was no separate defense ministry. All defense activities were centralized under Gaddafi. There was a high command of the armed forces. Arms production was limited and manufacturers were state-owned. Colonel Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr was the last Minister of Defense of the Gaddafi-era military. Origins and history 1945–69. The roots of the 1951–2011 Libyan armed forces can be traced to the Libyan Arab Force of World War II. Shortly after Italy entered the war, a number of Libyan leaders living in exile in Egypt called on their compatriots to organize themselves into military units and join the British in the war against the Axis powers. 5 battalions, which were initially designed for guerrilla warfare in the Jabal al-Aqda region of Cyrenaica, were established under British command. Because the high mobility of the desert campaigns required a considerable degree of technical and mechanical expertise, the Libyan forces were used primarily as auxiliaries, guarding military installations and prisoners. 1 battalion, however, participated in the fighting at Tobruk. After Britain succeeded in occupying the Libyan territories, the need for the British-trained and equipped Sanasai troops appeared to be over. The Sanasai army was reluctant to disband, however, and the majority of its members arranged to be transferred to the local police force in Cyrenaica under the British military administration. When Libya gained its independence in 1951, veterans of the original Sanasai army formed the nucleus of the Royal Libyan Army. British Army troops, part of Middle East Command and comprising 25th Armoured Brigade and briefly 10th Armoured Division, were still present after independence and stayed in Libya until at least 1957. Despite the Sanasi lineage of the new army, King Idris I quickly came to distrust them. The Free Officers' coup of 1952 in Egypt led many Libyan officers to be disenchanted with Idris and become great followers of Gamal Abdel Nasser. This situation reached the stage that the British Army officers retained by Idris to train and advise the new armed forces deemed the force entirely untrustworthy. They increasingly saw their role as to watch the army rather than to raise its effectiveness. Meanwhile, Idris formed a navy in 1962 and an air force in 1963. He attempted to counter his growing doubts about the loyalty of the army by stripping it of potential. He placed loyal but often unqualified Cyrenaicans in all senior command positions, limited the armed forces to 6,500 men, kept the army lightly armed, and built up 2 rival paramilitary units, the National Security Force and the Cyrenaican Defense Force, which was recruited from Cyrenaican Bedouin loyal to the Sanasi. Together the two forces had a total of 14,000 men armed with helicopters, armored cars, anti-tank weapons, and artillery. These measures did not prevent, however, a group of army officers led by then-Captain Muammar Gaddafi seizing power on 1 September 1969. Pollock says that the defeat of the Arabs during the Six-Day War of July 1967 was an important factor in the coup, as the officers believed that Libya should have dispatched forces to aid Egypt and the other Arab states. Idris had also tried to reform the military, but only half-heartedly, further frustrating young Libyan officers. Immediately after the coup, Gaddafi began to dismiss, arrest, or execute every officer above the rank of colonel in the armed forces, as well as some other lower-ranking officers closely linked to the monarchy. Then he began to reorganize the armed forces in line with his foreign policy plans. Expansion of the army and amalgamation of the CDF and NSF into the army was the first priority, and by 1970 the force numbered nearly 20,000. Attention was also focused on the Air Force. With the pre-coup strength of 400 personnel and 10 Northrop F-5 Freedom fighter jet fighters planned to be supplemented with large-scale purchases of Mirage 3 fighters from France.